Today I want to share with you 10 tips for total reverb omniscience that I mention quite a lot in my Patreon one-to-ones, but I don't think are brought up nearly enough in general studio settings. Let's dive into it. Number 1, use the same reverb for everything. It sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But sometimes if you're using a mix of plate, spring, and hall reverbs and an assortment of stock and third-party reverb, you really do increase your chances of muddying the mix. Find a reverb that you can use in all scenarios of your song. So for that reason, in this episode, I'm only going to use Cableguys' new ReverbShaper. Its visual feedback will make it easier for you to understand what is happening to my sound as my tips continue. And as the name suggests, we have everything we need to shape the sound of the reverb. So I won't need to leave this window and confuse you should you not use the same DAW as me. With that said, I want to thank Cableguys for sponsoring this video. There is an affiliate link in the description, but this isn't a review video. Let's get to the rest of the reverb tips. Number 2, make sure you're EQing your reverb. You don't want to EQ your reverb as part of the chain. That will only end up changing your original source material. Instead, you want to EQ the reverb tail itself, which should create some separation from the sound and reduce overlapping muddy frequencies. So here I have a lead vocal. Baby, won't you come on over? What I can do here is split the bands of that reverb, and what's really nice in ReverbShaper, I can actually listen to those bands and just listen to the reverb. Baby, won't you come on over? Come over, baby. I can deselect that band solo option and now listen to everything together. Baby, won't you come on over? When adding reverb to a drum stem, this can be particularly helpful when listening out for those hi-hat transients that we don't want to be in the reverb. Speaking of sound separation, producers like Bonobo and Disclosure create even more clarity in the mix by making their reverb wider than the original source material. They normally do this with drums and percussion. So you can keep your snare in mono with a centralized sound, but make the reverb tail even wider, creating space, but also enhancing the listening experience for your audience. So we're applying the reverb just to the snare here, but with the sound in mono, you can hear that we don't really get to appreciate the reverb tail. Increasing that width will give us a little bit more clarity to our mix. Number 4, get creative with your reverb to create swells and tension. Resampling just a small chop of your lead vocal and then applying a large hall reverb with a long decay can produce a really nice vocal swell. Just automate the volume of that reverb from low to high and slap it in before the initial vocal or drop of your song. When using reverb on vocals, you really should find the sweet spot. It shouldn't be a plugin where you just set it and forget it. Therefore, there are several parameters that we can adjust to make sure that our chosen instrument comes through cleanly and our reverb fills the spaces in between. Number 5, adjust your pre-delay. You can set your pre-delay to a note value. This works particularly well when working with vocals and setting your pre-delay to an 8th or 16th note value. This will allow the vocal to breathe for just a second before the reverb takes place. It's subtle, but it gives the listener a chance to catch the enunciation before the reverb washes anything out. Currently, we have no pre-delay. But now if we add a 16th note pre-delay, we'll get just a breath of air beforehand. Something even more helpful, which I mention all the time, is tip number 6, sidechaining your vocal. In ReverbShaper, you can just turn the envelope on and open this pop-up menu. By pulling the threshold down, you're going to create more of a sidechain ducking effect, which will catch certain vocals and make sure that the reverb isn't taking place. If I could stay the night, make you feel alright. I know you're nervous, but I'm in service. If I could stay the night, make you feel alright. By adjusting that threshold and envelope slider, you'll be able to find a sweet spot where the vocal comes through clearly, but the reverb fills any spaces in those lyrics. Tip number 7, gate your reverb. I often think of this when I listen to Kings of Leon's on-call vocal.
I'm on call, so be there, one and all.
I wonder if the track was accidentally gated in the wrong areas, maybe when creating an alternate arrangement of the track in the studio process. But even if this is a sonic fault, we still have something to learn from, because applying that same technique to drums gives us that classic 80s Phil Collins drum sound. Okay, let's use the Infinity Comb preset, a nice textured reverb, to add a little bit of space to the snare just here. So it's drifting just a little bit too much for my taste, so I'm just going to switch on gated. Turning on the gate allows the instrument to explode and fill up the space, but turning it off will quickly close it to make sure that it doesn't overlap other instruments. But I can already hear you shouting at the screen, yes, sometimes you do want to have overlapping reverb textures. So why not use an auxiliary channel? Tip number 8, send your reverb. Using an auxiliary send can be super powerful. We hear this time and time again in future garage genres and in almost every reggae track as well. Okay, so this goes out to John Luke, who says we don't feature enough reggae on the channel. So right here we have this little side snare hit. And we definitely don't want reverb the entire time. So what I'm going to do is use the send portion of the ReverbShaper to just draw in a little automation for that side snare hit. This is set to 4 bars. Check this out. It's such a tasteful way to get a really nice dynamic accent hit in your percussion section. Tip number 9, clear your reverb tails. I feel like we've featured a lot of vocals and a lot of drums. So what about chords and melodics? If you're creating a spacious pad-like instrument, maybe you're playing chords on the piano, we don't want that reverb tail to drift over all of the different chords and create dissonance or mud. So you want to clear the reverb tails. This might be something that's exclusive to ReverbShaper. I haven't seen it before. You can do it in other ways, but it's definitely fiddly through automation. It really slows down your workflow. You can hear that there's this lovely piano playing. With all of the changing chords, we're getting this constant reverbious echo drifting over everything. So what we can do is turn on clear tails. Selecting this option makes sure that ReverbShaper pays attention to the stop-start nodes inside this bar. Every bar means that the reverb is going to reset. I'm going to turn it off and then I'll turn it on, and you should hear the clarity in the mix. Super tasteful, and maybe one of my favorite things about the new ReverbShaper. But number 10, we are kind of finishing as we started with maybe something a little bit obvious. And I do have one bonus point that I want to mention that's just come to my mind as well. But combine your reverb with other effects. Reverb is an effect that we just don't combine with other effects nearly enough. Increase the drive of your vocal swells for tension, maybe bit crush the tail end of a snare hit for a new transition sound, or maybe low pass it as we go into the next section of your song. The ways that we can combine a reverb chain are endless, and it goes without saying that if you're using ReverbShaper inside ShaperBox, then these chains are already made up in one device for you. There's even a ton of presets. So here I've just messed around with the pitch rhythmizer preset, and it sounds like this. And I have a lovely chopped vocal there. If I add some reverb to that, we get this. You can see that I've utilized a lot of the tips that we've mentioned. That reverb is a little bit wider. I'm using some pre-delay, and I'm making sure that I EQ that reverb and use the reverb sends in conjunction with the envelope and threshold. So we're sidechaining that vocal reverb as well. There's a lot of clarity, but there's also a lot of exciting textures going on. Now, I mentioned that there was one bonus tip: load your own impulse responses. Okay, so here I have some of Shurabon's PS1 reverbs. Yes, I got this idea idea from my boy Drew Grit, didn't we all? Shout out to you, buddy. I'm gonna place these impulse responses inside ShaperBox's custom impulse responses folder. And then when I go back to my ShaperBox presets over here in user, I have a bunch of custom PS1 reverbs to use within ShaperBox as well. Super cool. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And once again, thanks to Cableguys for sponsoring this video. If you want to cop ReverbShaper, which is out today as of filming this video, then you can use the affiliate link in the description below. I'll be back later this week for another episode of Inspired By, but until then, I'll see you next time.